Hi, I'm Jeremy Law, and I'm back to talk about some games from another online tournament played on chess.com. The same format as usual. It's an intra-club Metropolitan tournament with a 10+5 format over about 3 rounds. Mix of interesting games this week, so I hope you enjoy them. Game 1, I'm playing against DavidLondon. I have black, and it's a Petroff. David decides to go for bishop c4, and after I take on e4, to take on e5 himself with a knight. Which I don't think is the most critical try against Petroff. Once black's knocked out this e4 pawn, a thing that black's trying to do is to play d5. And when the bishop's just sitting there, giving a tempo away, this doesn't combine that well, as now the bishop has to move. Black has an even more accurate move of queen g5 hitting g2 and the loose knight on e5, but after just bishop to d6, hitting the loose knight a different way, and trade, white saves his bishop with another tempo, and we get to this sort of Petroff / exchanged French pawn structure, where black's just a little bit ahead in development and this bishop's slightly awkward, and black's pretty comfortable here. So I thought it would be worth talking about what else to do against the Petroff. What are our ideas to pose some problems to black? Well, the main ones are to take on e5 straight away, and then after black recaptures the e-pawn, either to play this sort of structure, which is pretty similar to what we had before, but now black's knight on e5 is vulnerable and his pieces are slightly awkward, rather than the other way around, where white had the awkward pieces and was slightly behind in development. Alternatively, knight c3 is a good move here, just opting for fast development of bishops and some open lines. Another option is d4 on move 3, or if you really want to play it as safe as possible, Scotch 4 knights is also an option. So plenty of playable lines against the Petroff, but I would recommend against this knight takes e5 in combination with bishop c4, which probably makes life a bit too easy for black. Nonetheless, we get this middle game, and I sort of alluded to this bishop on f3 being a bit awkward. I think its best square is probably tucked behind a d4 pawn on d3, looking at black's kingside, and it's quite a strong piece there. Whereas here, this pawn black can support quite well, and it's sort of biting on granite. And given that it's black's move now, and white wants to play d4, c5 makes a lot of sense. So white needs to develop some pieces. This bishop can't get out, so it plays d3, knight c6, still keeping this d4 move in check and threatening maybe to hop in at some point. So c3 from white is an understandable move. Black now develops the last piece and protects the d5 pawn, so this queen can move out. And what started as a fairly small lag in development and awkwardness of pieces is starting to look like it's developing into a bit of initiative and attack. Bishop g4 tries to trade some pieces, but this does allow queen h5 in with tempo, attacking h2 with a mate threat. This bishop's attacked twice. The only way that white can stop this is by playing h3. However, black's initiative now continues. f5 wins another tempo on the bishop, which has to retreat, and we can start the rook lift. So how can white defend? Not particularly straightforward, but Computer wants to recommend this, just giving up the h-pawn and trying to generate some space for the king and to cover some squares. Not at all natural, and it really is quite a lot of pressure on the king side now. But white's move essentially just gives one more tempo for black's attack, and that's enough to crash through. Computer wants to start playing these attacking moves immediately and completely ignoring white's threats, but I do respond to them. So take on c5, now I get my tempo for rook g6. h3 is now threatened because of the pin. White makes a counter threat, which again I don't need to defend it according to the computer, but I don't like dropping pieces with a check, so I defend it. We have a trade. White steps out of the pin, and already there's rook takes g2 ideas in the air. In fact, this does actually lead to a fairly swift mate. which I miss, and instead set it up. Knight d4 to cover the f3 square, taking away an escape square from the king. And after bishop e3, rook takes g2 is pretty much lights out. King has nowhere to run and make next move. So a quick game where things went downhill surprisingly fast for white, just because in these symmetrical positions a small lead and a small initiative really can build up quite fast, and there aren't many pieces around white's king. So that was our first round. Round 2, the first game we wanted to look at, is actually between Sasha 9194 as white and Hadj as black, because it's got an interesting endgame and also an interesting attack in the early middle game, which comes apart a little bit. So Henry is doing his usual hedgehoggy type development, and I like what white's doing, taking a big centre, castling and setting up to attack. But Henry finds a nice move to break against the middle. When the bishop's on c4 like this, it means that d5 is pretty much guaranteed to trade off a pair of centre pawns and start to get a little bit of space for the pieces. So bishop has to come back or get traded. So white has to deal with a threat and opts to trade. Throws a knight into e5, and white starts to build up an attack on the king side, which does look nice. We have this attacking pawn chain, good pieces, prospects for... My arrows are all over the place, but you get the idea. Prospects for white's pieces to come into the attack. And I like the way that Henry deals with this. Because after this position, he plays f6, which is a very natural move to try and break down this e5 point. But it doesn't quite look like black has the time for it. And indeed, Sandeep decides to just plough on, getting piece number 2, number 3 into the attack. But now black takes on e5, and we start to realise that actually the tactics aren't really working. If white takes here, then this check is actually really awkward. The bishop can't come back to block it because the knight covers that square, and otherwise the king can't keep hold of this rook on f1, so the immediate takes back doesn't work. Okay, what if we trade first then? Well, now the bishop's under attack, so we have to trade that too. And if we take here, black's got another check on c5, which picks up this bishop. So white has pretty much irreversibly gambited a pawn by this point, and black's starting to unzip this centre and stop the attack in its tracks. Okay, so rook f8, bishop g7, and knight d2 were played in the game, which allows black to take on d4. And after white, with a tempo on the queen, takes back on d4, black finally gets to play e5 with tempo on the queen and trading the final couple of centre pawns. So black's doing completely fine now. Unfortunately, Sandeep sets up unfortunately for black, Sandeep sets up a very sneaky pin here, which Henry misses and gives away a full piece. So game has turned. For the next few dozen moves, white's generally just converting and playing very well solidly to convert. However, things start to get interesting a little bit later. So here we are. We've arrived in an endgame. Both sides have 4 pawns, and it looks like white's about to put the nail in with trading off rooks, but misses that after this move, the white can cover the queening square, so white could have got away with trading rooks here, but after playing rook d1, black starts generating some serious counterplay of his own, because the kingside pawns vanish, and now black has 2 connected passed pawns, which are pretty close to queening, and suddenly it's gone from easily winning to a bit complicated, and maybe 3 results are possible again. Black pushes the h pawn, white pushes the a pawn. So which one's going to win? Well, this rook's guarding the queening square, so I can kind of understand why black wanted to mobilise and start playing a little bit defense. But actually, if you just push on, it makes white's winning task really quite hard. Let's say white pushes, and let's say black pushes. So we're now threatening rook g1, which more or less forces the queen through. White would have to play king h1 to stop that, and now just take the pawn if rook g1. Black has this phenomenal move here. Rook takes d3, because if king takes back, now these connected passes are going to roll through. The rook can't handle both on the 6th rank. So white would need to find rook takes h7 here to arrive in this endgame where white's just a pawn up, but actually these two connected pass pawns on the queen side are enough for white to win. And if we get the table place up, all of black's moves are losing. So white's only winning move here is capturing the h7 pawn, not the rook. But this is a theme we'll come back to later in the endgame. These two white connected pass pawns on the queen side, even against a far advanced black connected pawn over here, is winning for white, and white can set up this in a few ways if they recognise that. Okay, black plays rook e3, kind of understandingly wanting to play defence, and white carries on rolling the pawns. I think pushing a pawn would be more accurate, but okay. Black pushes, and knight comes back to f2. Now this is quite a cunning move, because the knight can now give itself up for one of these pawns. As we saw in the earlier endgame, two connected pass pawns on the queen side is enough for white to win, even if he loses the piece and sacks it back for a pawn. So this is actually quite accurate. However, this next move makes life a lot harder than it needed to be, because now the knight's pinned, and it's harder for it to give itself up. There is actually a trick of knight takes g4 with exactly the same idea. If king takes, then we're back to the same scenario. Two pass pawns wins, and if rook takes, the knight manages to land a fork and easily winning position there. Nonetheless, if white hasn't kind of seen this idea of sacking the knight, then this is not an easy idea to spot at all. So white carries on pushing, and black carries on pushing, and white carries on pushing, and here we've actually got to the point where g2 could have won the game for black, but again, probably in time pressure in one of these rapid games, the natural move of just taking the free piece was played, after which white continues to push, not even taking the rook back. Black takes, and white gets a queen. Again, funny unbalanced sort of position. These pawns are so advanced that actually, with correct play from both sides here, white just has to keep delivering checks. Otherwise black will get a queen and be a full rook up, and probably winning with amazing computer technique, that is. So yeah, white starts giving checks, and the game does peter out to a draw. Both players missing that rook f4 here would actually be check, and a bit of a last minute turnaround. Nonetheless, I think a draw is probably a fair outcome given the ups and downs over the course of the game. I think both players found some really interesting resources, and another endgame where there's more than meets the eye going on, especially with g2 and this knight sacking for pawns idea, just to get these two connected pass pawns on the queen side, which would have been enough to win. So this time I have white, and Sasha's got the modern /perk type setup, and I've gone for the kind of 150 attack it's called against the perk. Very similar setup to a Yugoslav against a dragon, or a Samish against the King's Indian, where you set up your pawns like this, you put your queen and bishop on this diagonal, you castle queen side, and you throw the h-pawn down the board and try to checkmate black. Quite one-dimensional, but effective. And black in the meantime has to try and set up counterplay. So we get this position, and Sasa just gives up a piece to stop the attack. But I think giving up a piece here is probably a cure worse than the pawn storm disease. Because pre-sack, white kind of has to win a mating race, whereas after sacking, white has two ways to win. You can either win the pawn storm race, which is now admittedly a lot harder without the pawn breaks. But more realistically, you can just play very conservatively and try to trade down pieces and win slowly. The rest of the game should be mopping up from here. Admittedly, things were missed in this position. White has a nice tactic to just put the game away. Instead of trying to continue to trade queens, we can do so a lot more directly with just queen takes c6. And if queen takes back, then knight e7 check picks up the material. And then a final nice little tactic to wrap up the game. Black threatens mate on c2, but queen f6 check drives the king back, and mate on h8 finish the game. So what could black do instead to meet this sort of attack? Well, one really nice idea in a lot of these positions is whenever white plays h4, threatening to push on with h5 or perhaps get another pawn in, just playing h5 as black to block it can slow down white quite considerably, because this means now if white wants to play g4 straight away, this would be a pawn sacrifice. Black's got too much stuff covering the square. Say after a sequence like this, this doesn't look very good for white, because black's now firmly blocking that h-file. So white would have to build up a little more here. And then on the other side of the board, black's counterplay can come quite quickly. Let's just say white plays some sort of prosaic developing type moves. There are threats, and the breaks will come fast. So black needs to be throwing in this h5 move to slow the attack down, and really concentrating on getting counterplay going on the other side of the board. Which brings us on to round 3 game, which I think was my favourite of the tournament. This was against Adam, who was also on tour f2 going into round 3, and he had white pieces. So in previous games, he's normally played fianchetto type setups against my Gruenfeld, but today he actually goes for mainline, so I was delighted. And we have the mainline exchange Gruenfeld, where I've played c5 instead of bishop g7, but these more or less transpose, and he also goes for something slightly unusual, for bishop g5, which is very similar to, for example, bishop e3, this line, where white's main idea is to just get all the pieces off this dangerous long diagonal, get the rook covering this pawn instead of being a liability on a1, and this means that white is free to play d5 at some early point whenever they feel like it, and that takes a lot of the pressure off white's centre. So you're delaying castling and developing more kingside, but it's quite a nice system for white, I think. And bishop g5 has a lot in common with this. Rook c1 is Adam's next move, and after I castle, knight f3, bishop g4, we actually transpose back to a theoretical position where we could have got to this position through bishop e3, except now my pawn is on h6 rather than being on h7, which is a small difference, but comes up a bit later. So okay, white's now attacking this. Queen a5 puts some pressure on awkward points, and queen d2 meets that. I take the opportunity to double white's pawns and stop this knight from doing anything else useful. And now in the theoretical position via bishop e3, my pawn would be on h7 and not be attacked here. So in this position I have to play king h7 to defend it, which means that earlier on I should be playing slightly differently. Instead of h6 to knock the bishop back, I think a different development of the queen, and there are some improvements basically. After king h7, I think white's got quite a nice initiative. Either of these plans of just marching h and f pawns down the board to soften up this already quite weak g6 square gives white quite a nasty attack. And okay, black can start to do things on the queen side too, but I'd definitely pick white. Adam opts to treat it a little bit more positionally. He argues, okay, your knight's not found a useful job yet, let me just take away its only real development square and play bishop h3. So I develop 2, also setting up some undermining centre ideas. Adam trades off the queens, and after I've defended my pawn on him again, maybe threatening some of these ideas. White sidesteps that. And finally, I'm trying to develop my knight. So Adam, still playing in positional boa constrictor mode, with 2 bishops against my fairly passive knight and bishop that's currently not really shooting it very much. Takes away some squares, so I don't have e5 anymore. Can I go to e4? Nope. White defends that too. Okay, can I go to d6? No, you can't have that either. So my knight is now really desperate for squares, and I have to play this undermining f6 move. In the game, Adam took on f6, and I finally do secure the space for my knight, and I'm doing okay again. But there's actually a really beautiful idea of just f5, really turning the screws. Because if I just push past this and try to keep pressure on this, okay, my knight now gets a square, but look at this bishop. That's completely entombed by my own pawns and a kind of miserable position for black. And what else do I do here? I'd have to give away this g6 point, which starts to make my king look very, very unhappy as well. So that would have been quite an enterprising way for white to continue the initiative, but I missed it as well. And as played in the game, I do manage to secure some space. Nonetheless, f5 still comes, and I have to try and keep things a little bit closed. Now we have a more even endgame, where my pieces are getting into the game. White has still chances to generate some play against the king over here. I'm not feeling especially comfortable, so I have to do a little bit of manoeuvring around to get the rooks into position. And we had agreed to draw soon after this. In the game I was thinking I felt a bit worse, but looking at it afterwards, black's got some ideas to redeploy pieces as well, and now the king is starting to get over here. We can probably hold all our weaknesses together, and it's not so clear that this bishop's got that many targets either. So I think probably a result was reasonably fair. And that brought us to 2.5 each. Adam did win on tiebreak, but pretty happy with that performance really. And well played to everyone. Thanks to Peter for organising it, and thanks for everyone playing, and thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.